Although I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas, this podcast is not therapy and should not be used as therapeutic intervention. Many of the products and practices mentioned are for educational and informational purposes only. Should you need support, please seek appropriate, qualified, and licensed professionals. Hey y'all, welcome to Between a Hot Mess and a Therapist, the podcast where we navigate the murky waters between what society expects and what it means to truly live, embrace the messiness, the beautiful chaos of life, and celebrating the rebellion in the process. Whether you're a recent graduate, a seasoned therapist, or someone simply curious, there's something here for everyone. But before we dive in, make sure you join the Hot Mess Rebellion community where you can connect to other like-minded souls. I'm your host, Shauna Lovin, a seasoned therapist and wellness educator with a very rebellious spirit. So grab your favorite beverage, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's rebellion. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Between a Hot Mess and a Therapist. Today, we are talking about the science or the link behind mental health and hormones. So when I say hormones, I'm specifically talking about fibroids. And if you didn't know, July is Fibroid Awareness Month. But I'm also talking about PCOS, endo, and PMDD because they're kind of all linked, but nobody talks about them enough together or at all. And so when I mention fibroid, I mean kind of all of them. But the general idea is, how are our hormones impacting our overall mental health? And this is not just for you as the clinician or the therapist, it's also for the clients that you're working with, because so many people are dealing with these types of medical issues or concerns, and nobody really knows how to work with them. My own personal journey is what led me down the road to helping other women and supporting other women on how to be an advocate for themselves, how to work with their doctor, and what are just some things that you could do to just kind of manage yourself. So I'll get into a little bit more detail about some things, but that's kind of where this conversation is going today. And I struggled with trying to record it just because, I could talk about what all the hormone levels or what all the hormones do, like cortisol, your HPA, insulin resistance, thyroid, all of your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. There's a few. There's like 9 major hormones. And I can talk about what they all do, but when you don't manage any of those, they all lead to burnout. They all lead to stress. They all lead to anxiety. They all lead to feeling overwhelmed. That's where all the roads lead. So I wanted to take a quick different spin on the topic and give you some stats, talk about the science, and then maybe throw a little bit about myself in there. So did you know that fibroids are the most common benign tumor that women of reproductive age can get? So think like something like 24 million. And I think all these stats are probably back in maybe 2020 or just around there. There's not a lot of research around fibroids, PCOS, endo, or PMDD, but yet the most research comes around fibroids in particular. So yeah, it's the most common benign tumor that we can have in your uterus. So they can grow in it, outside of it, in the walls. Yeah, they can be anywhere. So 70 to 80% of women develop fibroids by the time that they're 50. So if you're reproductive before the age of 50, you're likely to get fibroids. 25% of women experience significant symptoms. And they're different for everyone when it comes to symptoms. They're like, pain. There's definitely discomfort. There's IBS. There's heavy periods, which is known with fibroids. And there's quite a few others. However, did you know that African American women are 3 times more likely to have fibroids than any other group? Now, I've done my own digging and research kind of around it. Like, why is that? Well, given that a lot of our heritage comes from the West Ivory Coast of Africa, there's a couple of tribes, especially near Senegal. The research shows that they are high likely to have fibroids that they're dealing with. And so if our heritage links back to the Ivory Coast, hello, that's why 40% of women report frequent pain and discomfort and cramps during their cycle. Now, the cycle is the whole thing, the whole month. The period is just the days that you're actually bleeding. Please excuse this, males, if you are kind of grossed out by this. But 3 times the risk of developing anemia. So that explains why you're cold all the time. You're losing so much blood. In theory, we should only have 3 tablespoons of blood. And I'm just like, what the hell? That is like not a lot at all. But our periods should be very light in nature, not really heavy, not clotty, not any of that. And people who have fibroids, it's like quadruple that. So African American women are 2 times more likely to struggle in infertility than, say, our Caucasian women. The average woman copes with these symptoms and self-medicate in some kind of way for 5 years before they talk to the doctor. I don't think I did, but there's a caveat to that. All of the women diagnosed with fibroids have 6 times more likely to have an inappropriate hysterectomy, which overall contributes to $600,000 a year. So what I mean by that is so many women get fed up with the symptoms, and then their doctor says that they need to have a hysterectomy, and so they do it. And there is no need to do that. And so if you have followed me in the past, one of the biggest issues I have is the medical community when it comes around fibroids, and how most of them don't know anything about it. And they just either throw pills at you or they suggest surgery or some kind of procedure. And that doesn't really fix the issue. There are so many natural ways where you can kind of manage or even get rid of them in some cases. African American women are 2.5 times more likely to have a hysterectomy, again, because we're being gaslighted into having one. 1 in 5 women believe that hysterectomy is the only treatment because that's what they tell us. 68% of women, African American women, experience complications from a hysterectomy. Well, remember, they gaslighted us in this, and then they don't tell us about the pros and cons of actually having it. They just do it. 7 times more likely to have a myomectomy, and that's something that I had. But again, I'll go into my story here shortly. And then there's 2.5 more times likely to experience post-myomectomy complications. African American women are more often report symptoms of interfering with physical activity, personal relationships, sex lives, and again, fertility. So these are just some of the most common facts when it comes to fibroids. And I would suggest that you do your homework and research. But again, there's not a lot out there. And, you know, some of these things that I have definitely experienced personally, just because, again, this is something that is not talked about, and which is why I like to talk about it and bring awareness to it. So what's really the science behind the link in mental health? Well, some of the studies are showing that there's they exhibit significant emotional response to their fibroids, which typically includes fear, anger, anxiety, and sometimes depression. Half of the women that they kind of studied in this place, they felt helpless and they believed that they had no control over their fibroids, and meaning like you just like have no control over your body or like what's happening to it. It's like you got all this stuff going on, but you can't really do anything about it. Many women have like a negative self-image, And it's kind of like feeling less attracted, feeling like you can't be intimate with your partner, just because it's the way that we feel about our body and like what is happening to it when, it's unclear of what's happening. Again, remember, think 5 years before someone decides they want to get help. So what are some of the fears around that? It's really because when you think about having surgery, which is really, or some kind of procedure, that's what they recommend. It's an invasive treatment on your body. And there aren't any clear major deterrents for people who deal with this because the doctors are gaslighting us into having surgery or taking pills, like I said. In 2014, another study showed that women delayed seeking treatment, because they knew they had heavy periods. They knew were they experiencing all these problems and things, but they didn't want to be a burden like on their family or a burden on womanhood, a burden to anyone. And so they just kind of dealt with it. That's where your 5 years comes from. And then they don't seek treatment, and then they figure out other ways to kind of minimize. And they just said that they either just deal with it or they find other ways to kind of just manage where they are. Oftentimes it's not great management because they're still dealing with a lot of symptoms, but that's just kind of where the mind tends to go. So research also suggests that the link between fibroids and depression really has to do with your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is your APA. And really the APA is the nerve system in your body where it's like the information highway where all of your body is connecting here, and it regulates our stress and our hormones, or our emotions, And this communication highway, it's significant because it tells us when the HPA is out of whack that the stress response really intensifies. It alters our moods, and potentially this is what causes depression. And so if our hormones or processing can affect and create or give us, or however we want to look at it, depression. And then what was also interesting was that they found a higher level of progesterone in these women as well. And so when your progesterone typically is high, your estrogen typically can be low, or vice versa. And so when that happens is the fibroids grow very quickly. And so remember, we get anemic. And so, it's drawing the blood to the fibroids in your uterus, which is why they're growing pretty fast. So the thing I want to just kind of leave with you about all this is that doesn't matter if you have fibroids, PCOS, endo, or PMDD. Well, not so much PMDD because that's a whole nother category. But if you definitely have the other ones, it has psychological impacts if you think so or not. They also have heavy professional impacts, because these are the things that are connected to your work performance, your absenteeism, and kind of other things that center around work, because you're dealing with what your what's happening to your body, which makes it hard to deal with or manage work. So everything that I do now is based upon my personal experience and all the research that I have done over the years. I always felt that there was a better way to help women regulate or manage irregular or painful periods. I always felt that birth control or having surgery was not the way, because how can you really be confident in your body when, you have something going on that you totally don't understand? And you're only getting pieces of the puzzle when you actually go to the doctor. Because remember, the doctors don't know a whole lot about fibroids in particular. So think about if you were told that you had to have, a surgery, a procedure, take medication, or just suffer through it. Well, that was definitely me. And so think about like in 2008, this is kind of when this all started for me. And, I was kind of not really having any pain or anything kind of going on with me at the time. And we were in the transition of moving to Texas from where we were, my husband and I. And, you go to the doctor because this is what you do before you leave and change insurances. You make sure everything is good. And so that's kind of what I did. I got the clean bill of health from my doctor. And then it wasn't until sometime after that, and then I moved to Texas, that I started having really kind of severe and debilitating pelvic pain. And I started having heavy bleeding. And my stomach was getting so big that I looked like I was about 3 or 4 months pregnant. And the thing was, is all this time I just thought like, oh, this is your normal cycle. This is normal. Like, yeah, whatever. And I was in my early 30s. I was still sort of in the honeymoon phase of marriage. And, we didn't have any kids. And they were like, you need a hysterectomy. And I was like, you're crazy. Like, no, because we wanted kids. We wanted to try to have a family. And so in 2009, I was diagnosed with fibroids, and I had 11, y'all. Yes, 11. They ranged in the size from a grapefruit to a green pea. So I had really big ones, really little ones. Again, I was looking like 3 or 4 months pregnant. And even though all this time I thought that things were normal, they really weren't. And my uterus was like some weird shape where even if I really wanted to get pregnant, I couldn't, because the fibroids were pushing on my uterus, making it like some weird, like other shape where it wasn't going to sustain things. And so this process just amazes me, because the following year I get a clean bill of health, but then 1 year later you get fibroids and you had freaking 11 of them. Like, what the hell is that? And so looking back, I kind of wondered if the original gynecologist that I was working with was totally honest, or did the fibroids really just grow that fast and cause havoc? Well, not being satisfied with the initial diagnosis and needing to have basically a hysterectomy, which I was not trying to do, I decided to kind of like find a specialist, do my own research, and figure out what else could I do. And so when I got a second opinion from Dr. S, he's here in the Austin area. He's like amazing. At least he gave me hope that I could eventually have my tiny humans. Even though I wasn't totally happy with like what he was suggesting, but at the time, that was the only suggestion that I could take. So surgery at the time was the only thing that you could do. And it's not now. You got all these options. Like, you could do all these things now, but at the time that wasn't the case. So in December of 2009, that morning, the week before Christmas, actually, I had 9 of the 11 fibroids removed. And due to like complication of like where the last 2 were, they couldn't take them out. And so basically they just left them in there. And so ever since then, I've had to really manage, like, are they growing? Are they not? Can I get rid of them? And I've managed since that time, them actually being really tiny and not really causing too many issues. I've had a period after I had my son, which was my second child, where I was starting to have issues again. But and overall, they've been pretty well managed. So I'm grateful for him, for the doctor that really, did this surgery. I had a myomectomy, and it was helpful at the time because that's what gave me birth to my tiny humans. But I also was not happy that he was saying like, they'll just grow back if you don't basically have kids. And I'm like, well, what if I never have kids? I don't want fibroids again. And so I really just started to dive into the research and started learning. And again, there was very little research. And, even now that it's 2024, there is still very little research. I think the most recent research came out suggesting that, a true Mediterranean diet is probably the most helpful thing that you can do besides maybe a little movement and managing your stress. Those would be like the big suggestions, like if you're experiencing this for yourself. So, over time, again, I've avoided having a second surgery. I, have found natural ways of trying to manage what I'm doing over here. I'm so in tune with my body that when I start to have trouble again or some discomfort, I'm paying attention and then I tighten up, like maybe where was I laxed in all of my natural remedies and solutions and things. And without fail, every year I get to go to the doctor and get an ultrasound to check to see what is happening. It was funny though that the last time I went to get my ultrasound, maybe in November of 2023, the doctor was like, hey, your fibroids are gotten bigger than say from a year before. And it wasn't very much. It was very little. And so she started asking me about like, are you having discomfort and pain and this and that, and heavy periods, whatever. And I told her like, no, I don't have anything. I was like, matter of fact, I'm like going through a perimenopause and not really having a cycle. So like, there you have it. Not everyone has the same symptoms, but it's also about, that was a trigger to me to kind of tighten it up and kind of get it together and kind of go back to what I was doing before so that I don't continue to have complications. And then 6 months later, here in the beginning of 2024, I had another ultrasound to kind of check in and they were just fine. No issues, no problems. So I say all this and I bring my own story to the table just because not everyone's symptoms or things look the same. Not everyone is experiencing it the same way, but this was one of the biggest things that I think that did affect my own mental health in many ways and how I managed to yes, I ended up with burnout at some point, but I think knowing that this was like a trigger for me to get to burnout, that was why I think I learned a lot about it and how to help other women because, again, this is something that is not talked about enough. And we really need to focus on how can we help women that are experiencing this, even as therapists. How can you help your clients who are experiencing this? Because there's a lot of things that are outside of your control when it comes to helping them manage mentally. And there's a lot of things medically that they need to be doing or physically they need to be doing, which is beyond technically your purview. So if you're here in Texas, there's only one other therapist that I have found that actually talks about PCOS, and she's up near the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then I'm the only other one that I have found that talks about fibroids, PCOS, or endo, PMDD for that matter, on the backside, because again, this is something that is not talked about enough. I really hope that you have found something out of this conversation that was helpful, insightful, that will help you either manage yourself or help you go work with your clients. So until next time. Thanks for joining today's rebellion with me. Remember, it's okay to be a hot mess sometimes. It's all part of the journey. Until next time, stay rebellious, stay authentic, and keep embracing the beautiful messiness of life. Don't forget to join the Hot Mess Rebellion community where you can connect with other like-minded souls. And anything mentioned in today's episode will be linked in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe, you share with a friend, you leave a review, and you keep coming back for more. This podcast was brought to you by Healing Roots Wellness and Botanicals. For more information, please visit healingrootswab.com.